All right, I don't want to have too much dead air, dead space at the beginning of the stream, so I decided to hit go and go live with the Astro Weather. How is everybody? It is the 8th of March, and we are ripping through Pisces. Where are we now? I think it's at 16 degrees. So I'm a little stuffy here. Ever since I got back from California, dealing with like airplane air and I don't know, there's something about Vegas, man. Vegas is a dark portal. I'm utterly convinced. Like at one time I actually liked going to Vegas every now and then because it was cool and fun. But I mean, I'm talking like back in the 80s, 70s and 80s, mostly the 80s, because that's when I was able to go there and indulge a little bit. But it's just become a really dark portal. And every time I go there, something weird happens. And so the last time I was there, which was just briefly, I got kind of got sick a little bit. And I haven't really been able to shake it too much because there's a lot of pollen and mold in the air here in Texas. So I apologize if I sound a little stuffy. Look at my face. It looks like the face of Mars today. It's a little red there, channeling some Mars energy. I had to go back to Sunrise on Mars because I had a copyright claim on my screen in the background before, my virtual screen in the background. That said, I think YouTube denied the copyright claim, but I'm not gonna mess around. I'm just gonna go back to Mars. I like Mars. Let's get into the weather. How's everybody doing with this this Virgo full moon? Man, it was really a full moon yesterday. Like, I mean, you could really feel that polarity with the moon and the mob. You know, I talked about this yesterday, right? And there are two kind of collective events that really demonstrate the moon and the mob. One of them is there's a guy that plays, well, he used to play basketball in the NBA. His name is JJ Redick. And JJ Redick is a Cancer, so keep that in mind. So he's ruled by the moon. I looked at his chart. He's got about 3 or 4 planets. He's got a pretty fat stellium in Cancer. And JJ Redick did something I've never seen anybody do before. On this full moon, he was on ESPN, and ESPN has this guy, Kendrick Perkins. And Kendrick Perkins was intimating that the NBA has chosen their MVPs, Steve Nash, Dirk Nowitzki, and Nikolai Jokic, because they're white. And they're appeasing to the white clientele or the white audience in the NBA or who watch the NBA, and uplifting these players over much more deserving, quote unquote, black players. Now, Kendrick Perkins actually said this. He was dog whistling, getting about as close as you can to basically saying that the NBA is racist, which I think is a bunch of garbage. But JJ Redick got on the show, I think it's First Take with Stephen A. Smith, and he called him out. I've never seen this before. It was not scripted. It was not rehearsed. Kendrick Perkins blew his stack. He couldn't handle the fact that JJ Redick was sitting there calmly just dissecting what he had said and basically said that it was untrue, and they were creating a narrative that did not exist. That's the moon in Virgo standing out from the mob. And I thought to myself, well, this guy's got a sack. But that's what the energy of yesterday, and even the lead up yesterday and the day before. On Monday, all the January 6th footage, 40,000 hours of January 6th footage. Think about that. That event took place over the course of what, maybe a day, and they have 40,000 hours worth of footage. That means they have a lot of cameras all over the place, right? And so all that broke just as the moon was moving into that locked in, full cycle. And then you have Tucker Carlson, whatever you think of Tucker Carlson. There's a lot of different opinions about him. But again, it's one of those standing out from the mob, right? It's like, here's a point of view, here's some footage, here's some facts, right? Virgo deals in facts, not feelings. And so when we go into the Virgo full moon, we're dealing with factual feelings, whether you like it or not. And then, on the other side, you have Chuck Schumer, who is complaining and whining and begging Rupert Murdoch to not air that program. And to me, both of those events are highly indicative of this Virgo full moon that stands out from the pack, right? This is the mob. And it's not a popular moon. It's just not a popular moon, because I would say the Virgo moon is prickly. And what's interesting is, some of you have been following the saga of my mother, who is now out of the hospital, who has a Virgo full moon. This is like her full moon in her chart. And man, she was just yesterday, all I could hear in her voice was determination. And I'm thinking about these people that were born, under Pluto and Cancer, and these are just different people. They're just wired differently, it's like, she can't wait to, get in her damn walker and hit the street, and try to ditch the walker. So, she was in her full glory in her Virgo moon. So here we go, 29 degrees as of 8 a.m. here in Austin, Texas. That's conjuncting my sun, by the way. So we're kind of out of the phase of the Virgo full moon. So early in the day here, watch your criticism, or watch your emotions with a critical eye, because there's nothing left in this moon. All the juice yesterday was, standing out from the kind of the Piscean mob. And when you get into the mob, Pisces really is the kind of indicative of the mob. It's almost amoeba-like. It could take any shape or form that, the mob needs to take. Like, the mob energy doesn't have a political bias. It kind of exists on its own. And you could even see it yesterday. Yesterday was so revelatory, because we had people like Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer and, all these fake Republicans. And, we know where Chuck Schumer stands. But it was like the Virgo moon was illuminating, this mobby energy over here, and just kind of shining a light on these swamp creatures. When I do think of Pisces, I do think of the swamp at times. Pisces and Scorpio, very swampy. And look, we have the South Node in Scorpio, which we don't really talk about during the daily, but that South Node is, it's in the first decan. So we're getting the most of that kind of gurgling underbelly of corruption, right? This is what we're seeing here. It's like, there are people who have been, if you've ever read any of the stories about these people that are on, I don't know, what would you call it? I was about to say death row. It's not death row, but they've been incarcerated for 2 years now, almost 3 years in some cases. And if you've read their stories, their lives are living hell. It's like a gulag in the 202. So all this is coming up now. All of this just dark underbelly of deep. Now, what's going to happen with this January 6th footage? And on the other side too, we have the Fauci stuff coming up as well. So we're really seeing the South Node begin to rear its ugly head, but it's important, it's essential, it has to happen. Now, the big question is, when we have the shift of the nodes on, July 25th. It's funny, when we get into that first decan, the nodes always slow down. And those last degrees of the nodes just seem like they are there forever. It's kind of like the universe is squeezing the essence. So it's getting everything they can the gods are getting everything they can out of those final degrees. So the big question is, will the South Node in Libra represent some form of justice? It's going to be a very interesting watch, for sure. So we have an inconjunct today, very quickly here in the morning. It's going to pass fairly soon. By the time we get into the late afternoon, we go through a voided course phase today. We're going to go, but later in the afternoon, the moon moves into the more conciliatory position of Libra, but then we get into the opposition of all the Aries planets. So do you want to be nice or do you want to be real? Because the moon in Libra wants to be nice. It wants to mediate. It wants to be fair. And Aries doesn't really have a lot of investment in being fair. Aries has an investment in being now. It's all about the now. So can you balance being fair and having a sense of equality and synergy, while at the same time dealing with the needs and immediacy of others, because we still have Venus in Aries, this smoking hot Venus, right? And it's been interesting because Venus and Chiron have been doing this dance, and so power and vulnerability in relationship has been a theme over, I would say, the last week. Venus is starting to separate now, and there's new possibility here as Venus approaches Juno. So if you've gone through a phase where you've been looking at the vulnerability of your relationship and you've come through it, well, there's an opportunity here to have a sense of kind of rebirth, right? Kind of a new spring in your relationship. If you're not in a relationship, this Venus-Chiron conjunction could be, it's been an interesting time. There are times where maybe you felt like you were alone and maybe you felt vulnerable, or maybe you had the opportunity to look at other people's relationships and say to yourself, I'm glad I'm not in one right now. And then you could bolster your own independence. Well, Venus is separating from Chiron and it's moving towards Juno, which is about a new beginning. Eventually, that Venus is going to come in and meet up with the true node. That'll be real interesting. We'll talk more about that as it approaches. Mars 22 Gemini coming into that hard square now with Neptune. And in light of the whole January 6th stuff and all the video footage that's emerging, this Mars-Neptune square is going to be really interesting to watch on the public stage. I mean, you literally are watching people like Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, act like victims. And of course, there's all this accusatory energy that's headed in the direction of Tucker Carlson and Fox News about how they're essentially throwing another Molotov cocktail into the legacy of democracy. This is all Mars-Neptune square stuff. This is crying wolf. This is the kind of the bleeding yowl of the victim with this Mars-Neptune. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. On a personal level, look around your own life, right? Where you have to deal with people who are trying to appeal to your higher instincts and try to get into your pocketbook at the same time. Like, that's a big part of this Mars-Neptune square. And my sense is, I'm going to talk a little bit about this on the 15 Minutes of Flame show, is that the tide is turning a bit. And for whatever reason, whether it's just, the pendulum of the balance of the universe, the tide is turning a bit. I'm going to get into this more at 9:11 a.m. And what I mean by that is that when I see somebody like JJ Redick get on ESPN and stand out with that moon in Virgo against the swampy mob and call out Kendrick Perkins, because that's all victim energy, right? I mean, that's victim energy. That's what I'm talking about here with that Mars-Neptune square. People, I'm going to use an expletive here. People have fucking had it, okay? They've had it. So the tide is turning, and when we look at Pisces, we invoke the power of the tide. the rising tide of change. And it's definitely in the air. And so, the social justice mindset and the woke psyche will not die an easy death. I mean, these are mindsets and ideologies that have been around since the Jacobin Revolution and the fall of the king and the queen of France, right? Marie Antoinette and Louis. This stuff has been around for a long time, preying upon people's vulnerabilities, preying upon people's lack of material standing in the world. It's still out there. It's still happening, but it's being exposed now. So this Mars-Neptune square, and we're going to have this Mars-Neptune square peak tomorrow and Thursday, right? So what's today? Today's Wednesday, right? So Thursday and Friday, this Mars-Neptune square, high tide on this Mars-Neptune square. And I would say in the collective space, keep your eye on people who are going to exhibit these traits, and they're going to be shown for what they are, which is a really weak show. Speaking of weak, I was looking at this march. Biden was in this march with all these so-called black leaders, and he was locking arms with Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton looks old and weak. I'm telling you right now. He looks old and weak. So if you're Al Sharpton, you're going to want to get in a few more licks before they stick you on the breathalyzer. But this is the energy right now, and it's out there, and it's really strong, and we're going to see it. We're going to see this thing play out, and it feels to me like we're reaching this high water mark of victimization. People are just tired of it, right? They're just tired of hearing these stories over and over and over again. And you're not going to get, when you deal with like a Mars-Neptune square, it's not going to be much more evident than when you have Mars in Gemini, because you'll see the other side of things. And you'll see people who are in positions of wealth and power complain about their position, or they'll point a finger at the so-called system, and the emperor will have no clothes. So this is where we are with that Mars Neptune. So I think it's really interesting. In your own life, just make sure that your emotions and your body and your physical health. And I'm working on the physical health part. I got to say, I do not like traveling by plane, and it's not because I have any fear of the plane crashing or anything. It's because of everything that's in that cabin that gets condensed and recirculated. I'm not a fan anyway. We also have a Sun-Mars square, and Sun-Mars squares are good for fighting, right? Fighting. There's this energy of rolling up your sleeves and saying enough, right? This is what J.J. Redick demonstrated yesterday on First Take. This, the narrative, this social Marxist narrative is beginning to crumble, and you're starting to see people step up and fight back, and it's a really interesting phenomena on the world stage. Saturn has now officially moved into Pisces. Look at that, 0 degrees. And as we said yesterday, early on, we have this, as Mars moves closer into Cancer, we're seeing the strength and the buttressing of Mars and Saturn. And I think that's going to be a really fascinating development, to be honest with you. People are ready, especially because of the season. We're moving into warmer weather here in the Northern Hemisphere. And people are going to roll up their sleeves, and they're going to say, okay, what do we need to do? What do I need to build? What structures do I need to reinforce in my life? Because that Mars in Cancer is really looking to, strengthen the domestic situation, whether it's your preps or whether it's your home or whatever you need to do, any improvements or Whatever those things are, there's a lot of really, really good energy about to break with that Mars Cancer, Saturn Pisces trine. And we're getting very close to that. So if you're a DIY person, or you like home projects, or you're into your garden, this is great energy for that. And also just in terms of self-preservation, we've been through a lot over the past, we can just rewind this thing to 2017, let's say 2017. So the last 6 years, we've been through a hell of a lot. And it feels to me like with this Mars ingress into Cancer and the trine to Saturn, that we're looking at reestablishing new ground. And it doesn't, and yeah, we take into account what's happening in the world, because honestly, there are things happening, right? We know there's always things happening in the world. There's no shortage of things happening in the world. But Cancer tends to be much more self-preservational. So we're really looking at this energy of self-preservation. And Mars with Saturn in Pisces, it's a great marriage. I mean, because you can put the shovel in the ground, and you can invest in the things that are going to nurture and feed you in the future. That's Saturn, right? Saturn looks to the past and it looks to the future. So there's a lot of really future-oriented thinking and action taking place, and that's really going to come about by the end of the month. Pluto right there, right at the edge, right today, this morning, we got a Pluto Moon Pluto trine, and it's just real brief. The moon will move into Libra, and we'll have some of that by degree, but a Moon Pluto trine at the beginning of the day should give you enough ballast and enough emotional depth so that you're able to express yourself and stay out of the pit and the dilemma of the Moon Neptune opposition, which we came through last night, but it's still there. So you have, and with the Moon in Virgo, we're dealing with practical realities, and Pluto is willing to blend and add to the potential of the practical reality. You know what to do. It may not be sexy, it may not be au courant, but you know what to do. Moon Neptune says, opposition says, oh man, I wish I was somewhere else. I wish I could have slept in this morning. I wish I could go back to that really great dream I had. Whereas the Moon Pluto trine says, get to work. You know what to do. Just lace it up. This is a good day for that. Very good day. Then we move into a balancing act tomorrow, which I'll talk more about. Okay, let's get into the start of the day. Today's star of the day, probably somebody you haven't heard of, but he's a very interesting character. Today's star of the day is Jim Bouton. And for all of you people out there who do not follow sports, even if you follow sports, this is a kind of a bit of a reach. But Jim Bouton is a very interesting character, and I'll tell you why. We'll look at his chart. Jim Bouton was the first Major League Baseball player to write an incendiary tell-all book called Ball 4, which I read when I was 10 years old. It was a huge influence on my life. And Jim Bouton was your consummate overachiever. He was born in Newark, New Jersey. Eventually he grew up in Illinois. And he winds up getting signed by the Yankees. And one of the things that Jim Bouton figures out how to do when he's young is throw a knuckleball, which was able to extend his career. And he was a part of a couple of Yankee World Series teams. And what he did is he kept notes on his time with the Yankees, the Seattle Pilots, excuse me, and then later on with the Atlanta Braves, and the Houston Astros. I think he had a bit of a run with the Houston Astros too. And so he wrote this book, Ball 4, which is a tell-all. And he was really excoriated And in baseball circles, he was banished because he was pulling back the curtain on what was happening with baseball. So how do we see this in his chart? Well, he has Mercury in Aries, and he has it in the sixth house. So when we look at Mercury in the sixth house, what do we know about that? Well, you got to use your brain every single day to help you make some dough, right? And he's got Saturn in Aries here as well in the sixth house. And Jim Bouton was, I would say, a bit of a scrapper, right? Once he threw too many innings and he blew his arm out. And so he, instead of walking away from baseball, he brought the knuckleball back. This guy had 3 comebacks, and that's like dogged Saturn in the sixth house. So he writes this, and I'll use the word again, incendiary. It's Aries. And Aries, all the fire signs are related to sports and performance. And so he has this Mercury in Aries. And what is it doing? It trines Pluto right up here at 29, Cancer, ingress into his 10th house, which is Leo and sports and pastimes. And his Pluto that's a very powerful Pluto. He changes the landscape, right? Pluto on the midheaven can be a culture changer. So he changes the landscape of somebody who's in sports and tells stories about sports. And he pulls the curtain back on all of the Plutonian shit that goes on in sports, sex, drugs, you name it. There's nothing that isn't sacred for Bouton. And even over here with Neptune in the 11th house being teams, right? He has Neptune there. And this is where he winds up getting ostracized. He becomes like a scapegoat for a lot of his teammates. And one of the people that he writes about, and sometimes in not always a satisfactory or laudatory fashion, is Mickey Mantle. A lot of what he wrote about Mickey Mantle was actually good, but some of it was very honest. And he talked about Mickey Mantle's drinking, which is very Neptunian, right? And Mickey Mantle was a major alcoholic, as many of the ball players were at that time, including Bouton, I think, to some degree. That's all very Neptunian, right? And he pulls back the veil with Neptune in the 11th house, which is teams. Libra rising, he's probably pretty easy to get along with. He had a career as a broadcaster too for a while, but he has this very intense moon in Scorpio and a true node in Scorpio. And he's got these Scorpio eyes. A lot of times Scorpio eyes are really kind of slitty. Clearly he has them. I could show you another picture where he exhibits those Scorpio eyes. But he's a very interesting character. And he's got the sun in the 5th house. So he makes his money right off of being an athlete and pursuing his hobbies and his pastimes. He also winds up being an actor for a brief period of time. And he's in The Long Goodbye that is directed by Robert Altman. And he plays a murderer in this movie with Elliot Gould. His name is Terry Lennox. He also has a really strange relationship with his wife, who writes a tell-all book about him. I mean, everything is on display with Jim Bouton's life. He's a very interesting character. And even with the South Node in Uranus, and he's got, Bouton's passed away, by the way. I think he passed away in 2019. But he has unfinished business with stirring the pot and being a bit of a radical. Definitely a bit of a radical. What's also interesting is when you look at his 4th house, I've talked about, looking at adoption and trying to find aspects that represent adoption. He actually adopted a kid, a young Korean boy. And so here we have Venus and Juno in the 4th house, and they're in Aquarius. And, so he winds up adopting somebody from another country. I mean, can we make a case for that? Maybe, especially with Aquarius there, right? That kind of an unconventional family. Then he has Mars in Sagittarius, and he has a long career, a really long career. So he's got that Mars-Saturn trine which is all about endurance. And I'll tell you one other thing about Jim Bouton, which is also quite interesting, is he's able to capitalize on his ideas and make some interesting dough on his ideas. If you have a kid who's played baseball, or even if you don't, you might be familiar with something called Big League Chew. And Big League Chew is a bubble gum that comes in an aluminum pouch, like vacuum sealed pouch, and it's shredded to make it look like it's tobacco chew that the ball players use. He came up with that idea when he was playing briefly for an independent baseball league team called the Portland Mavericks. That's an idea, Mercury and Aries, and boom, there's that Pluto trine, and he's making a lot of dough. He made a lot of money. Jim Bouton was, over the course of his life, in a very, very, what I would call picaresque career, very successful. And he has a bit of a soft spot too with Chiron and Cancer. He was against apartheid in South Africa, and he has some really interesting other parts of his personal life, and he's an interesting character. And he won't be in the Baseball Hall of Fame, but I would say he was one of the more influential people when it comes to changing the culture with sports. And even that Jupiter-Sun conjunction in Pisces, and having the ability to deal with like belief in himself. He had to believe in his ability to stick around, and it must have been very difficult, especially with this Neptune opposition, in dealing with the accusations and the slings and arrows of his teammates, aggression and anger towards him about spilling the beans, right? He's a very interesting character. So today started the day, the late, great Jim Bouton. All right, so if you are interested in more conversation and more topics that do include some astrology, but are not necessarily anchored or astrologically centric, please join me on 15 Minutes of Flame at 9/11 Central Standard Time on my website, which is right there, 15minutesofflame.com. You can always bookmark it in case you forget. It's OV. And if you're interested in really high quality CBD products, please go to trueamscience.com. And when you're there, you can peruse all their great products. I have a little bottle right here of 19, which is I'm going to take right after we do the transmission. And it's kind of a cousin of the moon dust. It's sort of like the oily resin of the moon dust, right? So I'm going to have a little dose of that after we stop streaming. So trueamscience.com, get $100 worth of product, and you get a free product thrown in. All you got to do is type in 15MINS, you'll get that free product. $150 more, nets you free shipping. All right, that's it. A little bit long today. Thanks for being here. Have an absolutely blessed day. We got the void course moon coming today. If you can, take the afternoon off. Why not? Wake up. It'll be like Spain, right? Take the afternoon off. Wake up tonight, or come back out tonight with that Libra moon and go out and maybe hit a happy hour or something like that. Hang out with the locals. All right, take good care, and hope to see you.